to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 27, where we're going to be talking about a game about building a weird medieval sort of landscape and controlling all the guilds there, Feudum. But first, we'll do as we always do and start with the news. Our first bit of news this week is that Gamelin Games has announced Tiny Epic Tactics, which is now on Kickstarter at the time of this recording. Tiny Epic Tactics basically looks to recreate the kind of experience you had playing games like Final Fantasy Tactics. It uses a series of nesting boxes that you can put down as like terrain to have multi-level terrain with a grid-style combat system. And apparently there's going to be a solo mode in the box where you can use the underside of the boxes as like a dungeon crawl tactical type game. And it looks stunning.
Yeah, man. When I saw those boxes flipped upside down and made an interior, that's where it's at.
That is good game design right there. Good production design. And it has these great little, wizard and rogue meeples and everything. I mean, it just looks like a really solid looking package. So if you're interested in the next Tiny Epic game, you can find that on Kickstarter right now. Our second bit of news for this week is that Garphill Games has released some more information about Paladins of the West Kingdom, which we mentioned on here a few episodes back. You'll know if you heard our review of Architects of the West Kingdom that we are pretty excited about this game. I mean, this is a really interesting looking title where you are drafting workers and using a small deck of cards to drive worker placement, both on your own player board and competing for spaces on a central board. It looks fascinating, has a solo mode in the box, and I cared enough about Architects of the West Kingdom that I really want to give this one a shot.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to. I'm interested to see what comes out of this.
Yeah, A trilogy about games set in a medieval period is not the most compelling, but at least their world is kind of whimsical and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And if this is in any way as mechanically interesting as the last one, I definitely want to check it out.
Right, yeah. They have pretty solid design and art and just production all around.
Yeah, I think so too. And it looks like it's coming to Kickstarter on March 6th, so if you're at all interested in Paladins of the West Kingdom, check that out when it hits Kickstarter very soon. Our third bit of news for this week is that CMON has released just a little bit more information about Bloodborne, the board game. We have now seen some cover art for this. This was revealed at the end of the Munchkin Dungeon campaign. I'm not interested in that at all, but I am very interested in this, and this looks to be their next Kickstarter. So there's no date for that yet, but it does play 1 to 4 players out of the box, so there is a solo mode in there. And many people are going to be interested in this IP, myself included, because I love me some Soulsborne games.
Yeah, see, I never really played them, so I'm neutral.
Man, I'm so excited. I think even if people have never played them, if you like dark Victorian horror, you might want to give this a look. So that'll be coming out probably sometime in March or early April, but we don't have a definitive date yet. Our last bit of news this week, and one that I am extremely excited about, is that Leader Games has announced Root, the Underworld expansion, which is coming to Kickstarter on March 14th. And man, this just looks so good.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I mean, Mole People.
Yeah, apparently one of the 2 new factions is going to be a group of moles who are like an Imperial faction, sort of similar to the Marquise, in that they have that kind of flexibility that the Marquise has, but they also apparently have some element of their faction that is similar to the escalation in the Eyrie, which is already great. And the other faction, the Corvid Conspiracy, which is, of course, crows.
And a great name.
Oh, yeah. What a great name. That's such pleasing alliteration. And these crows, their strategy tends to revolve around hatching secret plots. And that's all I need to know.
Right.
They had me at hatching. So if you're at all interested in that, you should also know that this comes with 2 new maps, one where you play under a mountain, one where you play on a lake. And it looks like the folks over at the Better Bot Project already have space reserved on the forums for these 2 new factions. So we will probably see some solo-friendly editions of these coming very soon.
Yeah, I'm just really looking forward to this. Just anything that expands upon Root, I'm for.
Oh yeah, 100%. If you have not listened to our review of Root yet, you should, and you'll learn why we are so excited. So that's coming to Kickstarter on March 14th. Get pumped. Okay, that's all we have for the news this week. Let's just get right into the review, which is for Feudum and the Queen's Army expansion. Feudum comes to us from designer Mark Swanson, and the expansion comes from Brian Neff and J.R. Honeycutt in addition to Mark. It's published by Oddbird Games in 2017 for the base game, 2018 for the expansion, and it plays 2 to 5 players or 1 to 5 with the expansion. Basically, the Queen's Army expansion is a solo mode in a box. In Feudum, each player is going to control several medieval characters that roam the countryside, tending farms, taxing towns, and taking outposts in efforts to rise in power. You're also going to compete to acquire coveted feudums, which increase your membership status in one of 6 guilds. But you also have to be careful because feudum owners have to pay homage to the king through military service, or else they're going to face the charge of disloyalty, which means losing points. So if you run your guilds wisely and you maintain control of key locations and adapt best to changing events, you're going to be the winner of the game. And in the solo game, the story is just a little bit more focused than that. The queen in this world is hunting down the behemoth, her bewitched former husband, who is the king. And once she has successfully beaten him, if she has, she will then come after you because you are a rebel who is somehow supporting the king. So that's the general idea behind the world of Feudum. We're just going to get started, as we always do, by talking about the components. And I have to say, just looking at this game when it first came on a Kickstarter, this was one of my most anticipated games of 2017, simply because of the way the game looks. And seeing it in person does not disappoint.
Yeah, it has phenomenal art. I just really, really love the art on this game.
Oh man, it's beautiful. When you see this laid out on the table, it has this long panorama style board that I love because it just gives you this sweeping view of the landscape that you're supposed to be interacting with. It has pictures of the different guild members along the side of the board, and their facial expressions and the way they're drawn is just quirky and kind of funny. I don't know. The whole thing has an interesting, you mentioned sort of fantasy, sort of steampunk kind of feel.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting style. I mean, there's really not a great comparison I can think off the top of my head, but I really like it. It's just really well executed.
Yeah, absolutely agree. There are a couple of issues that I have with the components. I mean, yes, it does look beautiful, but it's very clear that there are some sacrifices functionally that were made to support the forms they had chosen. So one of the things that sticks out is there are certain routes that you have to take in the map that you can only take by air or by water. And looking at those on the board, it's not easy to tell that those are there. They tried to make it feel organic, and so it didn't just feel like a path.
Right.
But unfortunately, that makes them difficult to see. They're like little bubbles coming up out of the ocean for the underwater path, or a flock of birds for the air path. Mm-hmm. And it just doesn't really work that well for me.
Right. The readability isn't great, but it's not awful.
No, it's not awful. It's just not a choice that I prefer, I guess. I would have liked them to draw attention to that just a little bit more. A bigger problem that I have is the game does not come with any kind of tracker for leadership in the different guilds that are along the outside edge of the board. And what I mean by that is, over the course of the game, sort of the main idea is you're going to be building up influence on the main board. And the more of those you have, the more you move up in leadership in the guilds. Unfortunately, because there's no mechanism for tracking how many of these things players have out on the board, you have to recount them every time somebody puts a new one out. And that just feels really bad. So it just feels like an oversight. Almost every play of this game that I've seen online has somebody bringing their own dice and setting them along the outside edge of the board to track guild leadership. And if that many people are doing it, it's not just a me problem.
Right.
Yes, you can make the case that you could just count them and it doesn't take that long, but you shouldn't have to make that case. So that's my issue with the components. Otherwise, I mean, there are some little cubes and things that aren't that pleasant to hold, but their color scheme and everything all ties together aesthetically in a really beautiful way.
Right. I would say as far as components, I didn't get the impression that this was much of a problem for you, but I just thought the board was too big. I thought it was too long. I wish that the whole like guild, all that stuff was just sideboards instead, because I've played on enough small tables to know that if I was playing on those tables, this would be hanging off the edges of those tables. And when you have tiny little cubes on those edges, just the ability for those to get knocked off or knocked around seems really high.
Yeah, I could see that. I do like the size of the board personally, just because the visuals are so good. It gives you a feast, I guess. But overall, I think I happen to have a big desk. Yeah, you're right. It's not going to fit on most tables, and it just takes up a ton of room. Speaking of things that are huge, let's talk about the rulebook. This is one of the meatiest rulebooks we've encountered in a while, and not just in terms of page length. This is a game with a lot of rules.
Yeah, it's a lot of rules, a lot to get through, a lot of highly specialized terms or references to types of items and resources and actions, things like that.
Yeah, and I don't enjoy reading rulebooks. I know a lot of people who play games do. They like diving in and learning the rules. I never have, but I get over it because I like playing games so much. I like exploring new systems. And I feel like as a general rule, I have a pretty easy time reading through a rulebook and being able to visualize when I'm done how the game would play and what it would feel like to play. I took a long time slogging through this rulebook, and by the time I got to the end, I felt like I had almost no idea how to play this game. It's hard to define exactly why that is, and I think it took me a little while to figure out why that was, but I think the reason is because even though the art presents this game as being highly thematic and maybe giving you a lot to hold on to while you're trying to understand the rules, it turns out that there's actually almost zero theme in this game.
Yeah, as I was learning the game and reading through the rules, I kept just like, I guess naturally my mind was trying to grasp at some kind of like foundational things to latch onto, to kind of build upon so I could place these rules. And I was constantly just felt like I was like, okay, here's another rule. I'll just try to store that away and floating around until I figure out what to do with it. Yeah,
but you end up doing that throughout the entire rule book. I mean, I can handle that for one or two rules within a rule set. You know, there are always going to be little exceptions and things that don't fit in thematically very neatly into what you're doing. I don't even need an incredibly strong theme. I just need something that will ground the mechanics a little bit for me. You know, like I love Stefan Feld games. Very few people accuse Stefan Feld games of being highly thematic experiences, right? Rado's on board that train, but he's, wrong in that area.
Right.
But the theme does make a little bit of sense with what you're doing. Here, the mechanics feel almost entirely divorced from the theme, and it will take a little bit for you to notice it, I think. It did for me, because when you watch the Kickstarter videos for this game, or you read some of the flavor text at the beginning of the rulebook, I mean, the people that are on this board are named. The people that you see pictured have names, and supposedly they're the master of such and such guild, and they have a history with this other character in the game. But it turns out that all of that is like smoke and mirrors, because none of those things present themselves in mechanical form within the game. And so there's just almost nothing for you to hold on to here. What that does for this game is it ends up feeling like there are 5 or 6 major things happening in this game, but they feel disconnected to me because there's no thematic tissue holding them together.
Yeah, I kept expecting the theme to kind of take root or make sense or start to gel, and then I just couldn't ever find any theme anywhere.
I agree. And the major problems that I have with this are that, number one, this is a really big game. And so if you're going to have a big game with a lot of rules, it just really helps to have something for your brain to latch onto. Of course, it makes sense that I would do X thing because of the theme here.
Right.
But that's not there. And so what that means is you end up flipping through the rulebook constantly, not even just during your first game, but during your first few games, trying to figure out what you're doing. And that is frustrating. I mean, I feel like I've gone through this rulebook so many times. It's hard to find exactly what I'm looking for in the rulebook. And it just feels like an exercise in learning the rules every game. The other problem that I have with this is that it presents itself as a thematic game. That's why I have trouble with this in a way that I don't have trouble with Patchwork, for instance. I mean, Patchwork is a smaller game anyway, so it has a very small rule set. But thematically, it doesn't make any sense. But I don't really care because Patchwork doesn't really try to bill itself as a quilt game. Right. You know, I mean, it has a quilt theme, but it's very clear from everything on the box that you're not going to feel like a quilt maker.
Right. And also, I feel like most games that have really, really light theme normally have much more simple and streamlined rule sets.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to say here, I've seen a couple of other reviewers who were sort of bashed in the comments of their review for not understanding that this is just the nature of heavy games, right? That apparently the reviewer has problem with the rule sets because they don't have an appreciation for heavy Euros. I love heavy Euros.
Yep.
Mid-heavy Euros are my bread and butter. And I saw someone say specifically, obviously you've never played a Vital Lacerda game or other games of that ilk. I found that interesting because I have just recently started learning my first Vital Lacerda game. I've just never had an opportunity to play one before. And that game is Lisboa, which is widely regarded to be the hardest to get your head around. And I am finding it to be highly thematic. And therefore easy to kind of wrap my head around the rules because there is a theme there. It's not one that I understand right away because it's like the history of Portugal. But because the designer gives me some thematic notes about it and helps me to understand why the mechanics make sense with the theme, I can hold the rule set in my head just fine. And that rule book is about the same size as this one. So it's not like I just can't understand the rules for heavy games. It's that this is a themeless heavy rule set, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, the lack of theme, I think for me, and just the way the rules are written and all of the different types of things happening in this game, I just eventually tapped out on this game. I gave it 2 attempts to try to get into and play, and it was just unbearable to me. I couldn't bother finishing it. You actually played through, though, several times, so...
Yeah, I did play through it several times, and I was able to get a feel for the mechanics and have everything start to gel for me a little bit. Although I did, even after my most recent game, I was still looking things up in the rulebook. So it's not like it all entirely came together for me. We cannot begin to cover all the mechanics in this game because this is a big game with a lot going on, and way more than we could fit in the space of this episode, really. But I do think there are several major things going on here that are pretty easy to cover. So, like I mentioned before, the heart of the game really are these 6 guilds along the outside edge of the board. And you're going to be trying to gain influence in these different guilds by influencing regions on the map. So the more influence you have on the map, the further up you're going to go in the guilds. And being ahead of a guild has perks that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But how you actually take actions in the game, first of all, is through card play. You don't just, place a worker out on a board or something like that to select the action you want. You use a deck of, 11 cards, something like that. It's not a very big deck of cards. You need to take 4 of them out every turn to pick your actions for the whole turn. And each one of those is an action that allows you to interact with the board or interact with the guilds. And then there's one that allows you to repeat another action that you have picked that round. And that's a pretty interesting decision, I think. Yeah, just the idea that you have these 11 actions, but you have to pick out just a few of them. You'll have that same choice again next round, so it's not like the core choice changes from round to round. But that's okay, because there's enough going on in this game that you don't need one more variable, right? I would say. But it is an interesting choice. The problem that I have with this, and this would be mostly limited to multiplayer experiences, I think, is this is fertile ground for analysis paralysis.
Whenever I was trying to play the game, that's all I could think about is how easy it would be to get bogged down with choices and how that would spiral out of control if your gaming group is prone to that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And even for the solo experience, A solo experience with this game can just be you sitting alone in a room staring at cards for a long time before you actually do anything. And that's not necessarily bad. That's not the sort of play style that I typically enjoy. I do like strategy in games, but I like a little bit of a tactical push, I guess. And it's not like that doesn't exist here, but having to think through your entire turn and program it, essentially, is a little bit harder for me. So just something to keep in mind for how the play of the game works and what it feels like. You play down these cards, though, and each one of them allows you to do a different action on the board. And there are more of those than we could go into, of course, but generally what you'll be doing are influencing places on the board by taking some of your little cylinders, putting them on a land type out on the board. You'll be upgrading the land types that you're already influencing or reinforcing the lands that are under your control so that nobody could take them away from you. Or you'll be harvesting what's already there to give you more resources. That's the general gist of what's going on. But you do that not just so that you can have more land, but because doing that allows you ultimately to gain control in the guilds. And this is the part of the game that most people talk about, I think, and that's garnered the most attention. And I think for good reason. It has an interesting kind of mechanic here that I've not really seen done in other games before. So one of the cards that you have in your deck, one of the actions you can take, is to interact with a guild, which is only one card, but those are 3 different possible actions you can do. You can trade with one of the guilds to go get some more good types that you need. You can pull from a guild, or you can push into a guild. And this is confusing, and it doesn't make that much sense thematically, so it takes a long time to wrap your head around it. But basically what that means is, if you are in a guild and you can see all the little spaces on the board for more resources, if there's space left in your guild, you can pull from the guild next to you resources from that guild into yours. And the more spaces you fill up, the more points, or the more good stuff that happens to you. Or you can push goods from your guild into the one next to you, and you can get points that way. And what that creates is this interesting sort of, push and pull relationship among the groups where you can pull resources away from the guild next to you to get points that way, and then push them back into the empty stores to get more points. It's I suppose interesting. It creates this circular relationship with the guilds along the outside edge of the board that a lot of people have fun exploring. I get why people find that interesting. It did not really hook me, mostly because of the number of rules involved with doing this one simple action.
Yeah. There's not a lot intuitive about it to me, is how it works. And unless I'm remembering incorrectly, the rules are all a little bit differently of what pushing and pulling means for each guild.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And it just wasn't interesting. It wasn't stimulating. It wasn't like, oh, that's a really cool thing I want to do and play around with. It was just rules to do something is how it came off to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, you can't get away from doing this in this game. I mean, there are lots of ways to earn points. You can go on an epic journey, which just means moving a lot and getting points for moving a lot. Or you can just keep upgrading your spaces on the board, different land types. That'll get you points. There are plenty of ways to get points, but the guilds are the main way. Controlling the guilds, pushing goods from the guilds, pulling goods into the guilds, all of that is the main way that you're going to get points here. And because that one piece isn't interesting, the rest of the game doesn't really hook me mechanically. And it becomes uninteresting to me, not only because it doesn't have much thematic grounding, but also because I feel like over the course of a game, I'm not doing much to affect the board state or to change the board state in any major way. It's too often that I hear Euro games referred to as cube pushers, right? And I hate that term because it reduces what makes great Euros truly great,
right,
to something as simple as scooting a cube across the board. This is a literal cube pusher. You are literally pushing cubes from one spot to the other spot and pushing them back again, and that's how you're getting points. And I know there's more nuance to it than that. I know there's more depth to it than that. But for me, what I need is a feeling that I am making an impact on the world in front of me, that things are changing significantly over the course of a game. A game that we haven't reviewed yet, but a lot of people love and have played solo is Spirit Island for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Spirit Island is a simple-looking game aesthetically. There's not much going on in the way the board looks.
Nope.
But what's great about it is from round to round, the board state is radically different. You are an agent in the world, and you make a lasting mark on the world. And that feels good as a player. But you come to a game instead of watching television because you want to interact with the thing. You want to feel like your brain is being brought to bear on this experience in front of you, and it changes it for the better.
Right. And it all thematically makes enough sense what's happening, either through just the board state changing from like the turn-to-turn rules, or just what the ways you're affecting it thematically makes sense.
Right.
And or I should say, it makes enough sense for it to have kind of an intuitiveness about it, for everything to kind of click. And I mean, I would say that for like heavy Euros in general. Like, even though you might be moving cubes around and things like that, there's always almost like I will get like a sense of awe of like, oh, that's really cool how all these things interact and how they make it kind of work with whatever theme they've chosen. Even if it's a dry theme, it's still just really cool to see how like it all snaps together.
Yes, and even if it's a game that doesn't have a tremendous theme wrapped around it, if you are changing the play experience in a significant way by what you do on your turn, that can be just as immersive as a really good theme. And ultimately, that's what allows you to lose yourself in the play experience.
Right. And I'm sure there's plenty of people that disagree with us on this game. And that's fine. If it works for you, wonderful. But it was difficult for both of us.
Yes. At no point in playing this game did I lose myself in it. At no point was I not aware of the minutes and hours of my life that were slipping away from me, never to be regained again. I just could always see the rules poking through every single thing that I did. That's why ultimately this did not create a satisfying play experience for me. I mean, there's more that we could say about the core rule set, but the core rules are not something that I really enjoy for that reason, because I don't feel like I'm an agent and because I'm not immersed thematically. Which isn't to say that you don't make decisions, because you do make plenty of decisions throughout the game. It's just that they feel like they have minimal impact on the world that's created here. And the solo mode does not do anything for me to fix these problems.
I've never played it with other people, and to say I've played it solo is obviously not really true in the fullest sense, because I never made it that deep into the game. But the solo game seems to be worse in regards of having less control over the board state and the world.
Yeah, it really does, because the way the solo mode is structured, it uses one thing that we've had trouble with in the past, and another thing that maybe we haven't discussed so much, but I actually hate in every game I've ever encountered it in. So the first one is it uses the random card flip that we've talked about from other games. This random card flip to drive an automa is nothing new, and it can be done well. There's a game that we're going to talk about in the near future that uses a small automa deck that, because you keep cycling through it, means you're familiar with its contents and you have an idea of what's coming up, and there's like a press your luck element almost when you interact with the automa. And so it's not like I dislike that altogether, but when you have a big automa deck, or in this case, 5 decks of cards.
That's so many decks.
It just feels random.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels random to me, and like you don't have any kind of meaningful idea of what's coming next as you play against the queen who is hunting down her behemoth husband and then coming after you. It's not a compelling play experience and engagement for that reason, but that's not a deal breaker for me. I mean, I'll endure a more random AI if the core game is really good, but of course, I don't really like the core game very much. And what makes this solo system particularly bad is that if you can't resolve the action on one of these cards, you have to follow a little flow chart on the back of the rulebook that shows you, okay, well, if you can't resolve that action, then you need to try this one next to it, and you have to look down at the little tiny picture of the card that they have on the alternate actions section here. And, oh, can I do that one? Let me get out my magnifying glass and see what the action is and if I can accomplish it. Oh, no, I can't. Okay, well then, can I do the next one? No, it looks like I can't. Okay, then you know she doesn't take an action this turn. This is old school GMT solo game crap. this kind of flowchart bot system has no place in modern board games. Now, granted, this is a small one, and it's not like you have to follow a whole tree the way you do in GMT games, but this is outdated. This is you spending more time on your games managing the AI than on your own turn. And not only that, more time looking at the rulebook to find out what to do next than interacting meaningfully with the game. And I just can't endure it any longer in solo games. There are too many good solo systems out there for this to still be happening.
I mean, this is what I ran into. I mean, not specifically what you're talking about with this flowchart style of actions, but just when I would try to sit down and play this game, it wasn't that it was too complicated, that I couldn't understand the rules. I just didn't have the constitution to go through everything I needed to do to play this game. And this just, I think, is somewhat of a difference between Brandon and I, in that he is a more experienced, a solo board game player, and it's just not my first intuition. I know we don't really talk about that as much as we did at the very beginning, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to spend my time to go through all of these rules and all of this system for a game that wasn't compelling to me. It was just so much time for something that wasn't really giving me any reward at all.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I understand that. I am a lover of solo games. I play them whenever I have free time. This is what I would choose to do with my time if I don't have a game group around, which is most of the time. And so for me to say that I did play this game, but I could not bring myself to play it more than the number of times I needed to review it is saying something. Because I'll stick with a big rule set. I'll stick with and put up with a lot because I love solo games and I just enjoy interacting with systems. But this was a bridge too far for me. And the thing is, I know that for a lot of people, this is their game of the year from last year. I've seen that. People that I really like and respect, like Derek Funkhauser from the Board Game Spotlight or James Hudson from Druid City Games, people who make great games or do great reviews, and I really like them. And so I guess what I'm saying is you have to take all this, like all of our reviews, with a grain of salt, right? We are still just two dudes in a room with a microphone. But that being said, this is the biggest disappointment I have had playing a game that I can remember.
Yeah. Whenever I saw that we were going to play this game, I was excited, just based on the artwork of the box alone.
Yeah, but the play experience is so overwrought and so bulky and hard to manage. I just can't recommend it really at all. Several people have said that this game has a development problem. I don't think that's the case because, as I understand it, this game was in development for years. Because I think what people mean when they say that is this needs to have several things stripped out of it to make it a more streamlined experience. I can't imagine what piece of this you would strip out that would make me enjoy it, and so I consider this to have a design problem rather than a development problem, although it is possibly the case that during development just more and more stuff was added here. For instance, the combat in the game feels tacked on in that way to me. Mm-hmm. After you have a feudum, there's a requirement that you do combats multiple times during a round so that you don't lose points. What that feels like to me is somebody said, oh, this game needs more interaction. Here's what we'll do. We will tell you, you will interact with other players, meaning combat, because of course we can't interact meaningfully in any other way. And if you don't do this, we will punish you. That is a design flaw and one that can't be overcome for me. So
when you say punish, you mean you just lose victory points.
Yeah, you just lose points. I mean, that's not fun. That's not a good incentive. You incentivize me by letting me get points, right? I mean, not just from doing the combat on the board, but give me extra points. So yeah, none of that is compelling for me, but it is for a lot of people. So
lots of people love this game.
Lots of people love this game. It's just not for us. Now, that said, if you do like this game or you hear this and you think, maybe there are things about this that sound interesting to you and you go on and you learn more about it and find out this is a game that you think you would like, I am happy to say I think the replayability is quite high here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of variability in the setup. There are, of course, the random flips of the cards. If you like randomness in your games, randomness does contribute to high replayability for me because you never know what's going to come out. And that can be a really good thing for a lot of people.
Right. Just the way the board state starts.
Oh, yeah. And there are just so many variable factors in the setup that, of course, it's going to feel different from game to game. And there is a lot of expansion content out for this. So if you like it, it's easy to expand all of that just by picking up one of these packs, and you'll have a new element to the game that you can explore. So the replayability is high, but for me, that's not really enough. And so we're going to finish this review by doing what we always do and talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly for this game. And for me, the one thing that I would definitely put in the good is the presentation and the artwork.
Right.
I mean, with very few exceptions, the production and everything for this game is just, it's not just good, it is stunning.
Right, it's rock solid.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful art design and direction. I really like that a lot. And I would say the fact that the replayability is so high is definitely a good thing for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, though, I would put everything else about this game in the ugly category. For me, there's not even anything just in the bad.
Yeah. And that's probably just more of a personal thing. But yeah, I don't know what I would softball on the things that I dislike. Just the theme, the rules, those all hit pretty hard for me.
Yeah, the theme, the rules, for sure. Both of those things are a major detriment to this game. Core mechanics that are uninteresting.
Right.
The lack of change in the board state, and a solo mode that relies too heavily on card flips and randomness. All of that for me makes this a bad experience. And so this game is not going to get the stamp of approval, which you probably figured out already. But again, check it out for yourself. Honestly, many of the games that in my mind stand out as some of the best games ever made are games that are divisive. Games that took a big risk and therefore are really polarizing experiences. There are plenty of games that get universal praise and that become evergreen titles that for me are ultimately just kind of okay. But games that stick out for me as being truly great, they do have some flaws to them, or there's something that could be a turnoff to other people, but everything else about it just cements it for me as a truly great title. I think that that's what this will be for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so if that is you and you think that might be something you're interested in, I've seen some really good coverage of this game, especially on John Gets Games. If you've never checked out his site, he does great rules overview videos and playthroughs. You should check out his run through of this. It's excellent and very well produced. But for us, this is a hard pass. And so that's all we've got for this episode. Just as a reminder, this show is a member of the Dice Tower Network, and so if you want to learn more about the podcasts that are in the Dice Tower Network, you can go to dicetower.com to find out more about those shows. If you haven't yet, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where you can see what new games we're getting in and what we're playing, and comment and interact with us on there. We're very active on those pages, so if you write something, you're very likely to hear back from one of us. If you haven't yet, please go on to iTunes and rate or review the show. I know that it benefits the show somehow. I cannot in any way articulate to you how your good review allows us to be seen and heard more, but I know that it can happen. So go rate and review us on iTunes. And if you haven't yet gotten your Solosaurus micro badge, we have those available for you free of charge. Just send me a message on Board Game Geek, and even if you don't have the Geek Gold to buy one for yourself, I'm more than happy to spot you the cash so that you can pick one up and sport your love for the show. And until next time, that's all for this episode. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.